So this is our freezer that we're going to modify. It's chest freezer, about a little bit over 5 cubic feet. Kind of see inside. We've tested how we're going to lay out the kegs and make sure that our gas tanks are going to fit when it's all said and done. The first thing we need to do is we're going to take this lid off. So should be able to take these coverings off on the back and unscrew it. And so that's what we're going to do first. Okay, so we pop the decorative covers off. This one has the spring-loaded mechanism that lets the lid open up nice and easy. But we can also see that these are pretty much just held in place by regular screws, so we're just going to take those out, and that should allow us to move the lid. Okay, so we've got the hinges off, so now the lid will just lift right off. And so what we're going to do is start building our collar, which is going to go around these edges, and we'll reattach that lid to the collar when we're finished. Okay, and what I've got going over here is we're starting to actually cut the collar. So this is going to be the inner piece of the collar. This is a 2x6 piece of wood. It serves two purposes. It raises the height of the kegerator so that we can get a second keg into this particular unit. It's going to be sitting up on a shelf, so we need a little bit more height. So the collar provides that for us. Second thing it's going to provide is this gives us a surface in which to drill holes from the outside to the inside. So we'll need that for our faucet, we'll need that for our temperature controller, we'll need that for the power supply for our fan that's going to be inside. And so if we didn't use the collar, we'd have to drill into the freezer itself, which could, if we didn't know exactly what we were doing or where to drill, could ruin what we're doing. So this solves two problems for us really conveniently, and when we stain it, it's going to look really, really nice. Okay, so here we are test fitting the inside of the collar, and it looks like our measurements came out exactly the way that we wanted them to. So what we're going to do next is get these attached and braced, and then we'll move on to working on the exterior of the collar. So this is the lumber that we used for what will be the outer part of the collar. We're just doing 3 sides. Since this is what's going to be visible, this is where we kind of sunk a lot of the money in. So this is a red oak board. You can see that we've mitered the edges so that it'll join real nice and smooth. And now that we've got these cut and measured out and test fitted everything, we're going to actually start the assembly. And what we're going to do is bolt these to the inner collar using some real nice brass bolts. They'll also be visible, so we want them to look a little bit fancy. So that's what we're going to work on next, and then we're also going to see about doing a decorative edge along the top. Okay, so we've got the front-facing side of the collar clamped on. We're about to put the holes in to bolt it together. We mentioned the boards were red oak. They are red oak, but these are 1 by 8-inch boards, and the pine at the inner side of the collar are 2 by 6. So this partly acts like a veneer to give us a nice finished surface, but if you look real closely, you can also see that it's hanging down. It overhangs the bottom of the collar, and the reason it's going to do that is because that's going to help lock it in place when we sit it down on the freezer. We'll have some weather stripping on the bottom that'll also keep it from moving around, but by having it overhang, it basically means the only direction it can move forward is forward. It's the only way it can possibly slide when it's sitting in the freezer, and it's going to be so heavy, and with that weather stripping, that's just not going to happen. So it'll be really firmly secured in place once we get it all finished. Okay, we've got the collar attached now and assembled. The inner collar and the outer collar. We've got some sanding work to do. We want to make sure we get these edges. They're pretty closely aligned, but they overhang just a little bit, and that can create a real sharp edge. So we want to sand that out, smooth it out, smooth out the top. This is actually really came together really well though. Much more precise than when I've done previous builds. So what's left to do? We've got to put the weather stripping on the bottom. We've got to get the holes for our faucets that are going to go roughly right here. And we'll test with the shanks. We've got a little bit of work to do in getting the top reattached and the fan set up. We'll need to drill some holes in the back for the fan and the temperature gauge there, but a lot of progress. We're still debating about whether or not we want to do a decorative finish along the top. We're gonna do some test runs to see what that looks like, but yeah, it's coming along really well. Okay, we've got the faucet holes cut, and now we're going to do the decorative top. So this could ruin the whole thing, or it could be really awesome. Okay, well we did it. We put the decorative trim on it using the router, and I actually think it turned out really well. So we did a bunch of test cuts and some scrap wood before we attempted this, since I have not done this type of cut before. But it was actually pretty smooth, and yeah, I think it makes it look really awesome. So cool. Okay. Some more work to do. We just now test fitted this for the first time. Everything looks great. So this is going to be our stopping point for today. Still have some tweaks to make, still some sanding to do. Got to get the stain done, but a lot of progress. The hard stuff is done.
Okay, so now it's my turn. Today we're going to put the first layer of stain down. I've wiped down the wood, so we've gotten all of the dust and debris off of it, and I'm going to put the first layer of stain on it. So this is it after the first coat of stain. We talked about doing 2 coats, possibly even 3. But after this first coat and seeing how dark it is and how rich it is, I think we're going to stop. I'm afraid if we do another coat, we're going to lose that grain of the wood that you can see there. And I really love being able to see the beauty of the wood with the stain. So we're going to stop. We're going to let this dry for 24 hours. And then we are going to seal it with a polyurethane to keep that rich color in and keep the moisture that's going to be produced by the freezer out. But as you can see, it looks beautiful. That dark, rich color with the beauty of that wood grain together.
We've added weather stripping to the bottom of the collar. This creates a tighter seal between the wood collar and the freezer to prevent cold air from leaking out. It'll also make the collar more stable sitting in the freezer. It's a lot harder for it to slide around. This is the fan that we've installed. What this is going to do is, because the freezer's got cooling coils in it, they're going to keep things cool, but our collar does not. And because hot air rises, what will happen is your hot air will kind of sit up here, creating a pretty big temperature differential between the top of the kegerator and the bottom. And so and why is that a problem? It's a problem because your beer lines are usually kind of sit up here, and your faucets are up here. So when you kind of go to get that first pour, that means the beer that's sitting on top is going to be a lot warmer, and it tends to come out very fizzy. So by installing this fan, we'll constantly push that hot air to the bottom and bring the cold air up top. Our temperature thermometer is going to be at the bottom, so when it pushes that hot air down and it gets it and it's warm enough, it'll kick the whole thing on, creating more cool air, and just the whole thing circulates, so it keeps a nice even temperature throughout the entire kegerator based on what we set it at. Installing this is a little bit hacky. We're just using hinges to kind of go into the collar. Again, an example while we use the collar so we don't have to drill anything into the actual um, freezer itself. We're hanging the fan off of those hinges, and then we've installed the reason we've got a hinge to begin with is you want to get stuff in and out of here, right? So when you move your kegs and your gas canisters, you want to be able to kind of get this up out of the way. So that's why we put it on a hinge. We put this wooden brace here so that it stays horizontal. If we didn't have it, it would droop down, and we want it to be evenly horizontal so it can push that air down. In the past, I've used braces to kind of come out here and provide more support. I'm not doing it with this version because this is a much lighter fan than what I've used in the past. It's also quieter. So I don't think it's heavy enough to be a problem, but we've got some metal braces just in case that we can span across here in the event that this ends up being too much weight. But it's all installed now. It's got a little bit of give, but not too much, and these hinges are real sturdy, so I think this is going to be fine. The only other thing I'm going to do is possibly put some Velcro on here so that when you flip this up, it catches. I think that'll be handy, especially if you've got one person trying to load this. It's hard to get the fan out of the way while you're loading kegs or canisters. This is a part of the process that tends to make people nervous. This is the one step in all of this where I actually have to damage something that we bought in order to make it work. So I need to run 2 wires from the back of the collar into the freezer. One is going to be our thermometer to read the temperature, and the other is going to be the power supply for that fan. Now, I want to make the holes for these as small as possible so that they'll be easier to fill, they'll be less noticeable. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to cut this cord, this power cord, in half. Because it's got the outlet on the end, which is large, and it's got this little connector for the fan, which is large. I don't want the holes to be that big. I want to keep the hole just big enough to get the wire through. And so what I'm going to do is cut it, run it through the hole, and then I'll splice it back together. I won't have to do that with a thermometer wire because it's equally small on the end. But because this is larger on the ends, I'm going to have to cut it in half to get it in the holes. But it's not too bad. We'll just splice it back together, use some electrical tape, and we'll be fine. So we've got the fan wire spliced together. We tested that out. It's working great. So that's excellent. The last thing to do is to get the lid, or the last thing before we start wiring up the plumbing is to get the lid back on. So we're going to reattach it where the collar is, and just kind of replicate what was kind of pre-drilled into the freezer there. We'll do the same thing on the collar, reattach those pieces, and then we should be good. We should be able to open and close the lid, and so we're getting really close to being finished. So we got the lid on, snapped into the back. Just opens real nice for us, just like it would if it was attached directly to the freezer. Now it's of course attached to the collar back here. Got the faucet shanks in, and just one of the faucets kind of sitting in there to make sure, just to test fit everything. It's probably not going to be, probably going to move that one and put the nitrous faucet on that side. But yeah, so far so good. The faucet holes, or the shank holes, were a little tight, and it may be because we stained it. It could have been that the holes weren't 100% straight. It could have been a combination of those things, but we were still able to kind of use a rubber mallet to go ahead and get them through without re-drilling or widening the hole in any way. So yeah, this looked good. And we're on our way to finishing this up.